It is the time again whereby we are now back. We are joined by Mr. Mandla, who will be just taking us through geography this morning. So once again, before we begin with our lesson for today, let me just take this opportunity to thank our students for tuning in, as well as the parents, of course, the teachers, the educators, the MECs, and most importantly as well, the director of the Fezile Dabi District, Dr. Chuta. Thank you so very much for listening as well on 103 Hope FM, connecting communities. Without any further waste of time, it's now exactly 6 minutes past the hour, 10 o'clock. Mr. Mandla, good morning.
Morning, sir. How are you?
I'm great. How are you, sir?
I'm good.
I'm good. We meet on a Sunday morning. Are you well?
I'm well, thank you.
Yeah, you're going to say it seems like?
A lazy Sunday.
Well, today we meet because of geography. What are we doing today? What is our topic for today?
Basically, today we're looking at rural settlement issues and some of the concept related to the issues experienced in rural areas. So it's just a continuation from where we left off the last time. Yeah.
Sure. That is Mr. Mandla, and we'll be talking about rural areas and the issues concerning rural settlement, of course. And do remember that 072-839-0427 is the number to dial if you have any questions. We'll be taking those questions at exactly, I'd say, 10 minutes to 5 minutes before 11 o'clock. Is it fine, Mr. Mandla?
Yeah, it's fine.
Sure. In the last 10 to 5 minutes of the lesson, we'll be just taking your questions on 072-839-0427, or simply go at Hope FM Official. That's on Facebook as well as on Twitter, right on 103 Hope FM. Mr. Mandla, over to you.
Thank you, sir. Dumelamba number grade 12. Without wasting any further time, let's jump to it. Ne? So like I said, today's lesson mainly focuses on the issues experienced in rural settlement issues. Now, the main problem experienced in rural settlements, it's what we refer to as rural-urban migration. Now, this is a concept that's going to sound very familiar to you grade 12 learners, because I'm sure you've done it in grade 11, 10, and so forth. Now, when we speak of rural-urban migration, we remember the term migration always refers to the movement of something. So in this instance, we're referring to that process where people move from rural areas to urban areas. It's that simple, Banabad. So rural-urban migration, the movement of people from rural areas to urban areas. Now, as we continue with this lesson, I need you to, at the back of your mind, to try and think of reasons as to why people would choose to move away from rural areas or rural settlements. Now, if you remember, Rite, a rural settlement is basically just a unifunctional settlement, and by that we mean the main economic activity occurring in rural settlement, it's just one main economic activity, and it's usually centered around the primary economic sector. Also, take that into account as we continue. Now, let's look at some of the causes to rural-urban migration. In other words, let's look at the reasons as to why people move from rural areas and choose to settle in urban areas. Now, the causes to rural-urban migration are divided into two broad categories. Yeah, let me put it that way. Two broad categories. We refer to them as push factors and pull factors. Now, when we refer to push factors, these are the conditions within the rural areas that are unfavorable for people to live. That would actually force people to move away from the rural areas. In other words, factors such as a lack of electricity, a lack of infrastructure, lack of educational facilities, lack of jobs within the rural areas are classified as push factors, because these factors that actually contribute to that migration. In other words, to that movement of people from rural areas to urban areas. Push, they force people to move away from the rural areas. Now, the other category, pull factors. Now, when we refer to pull factors, these would be conditions within urban areas that seem to attract people from rural areas to settle in urban areas. In other words, for example, if you are currently studying or doing your matric in towns such as Paris, towns, or rather, let me just say small towns, there's a high likelihood that when you finish your matric, you are most likely to migrate from that small town to an urban area in search of higher institutions of learning, such as universities, colleges, or whatever, or to even seek employment. In other words, when we refer to pull factors, just to sum it up, these are factors that attract people. These are situations or instances, or these are situations or things that happen in urban areas which attract people, which seem attractive to people that stay in rural areas. In other words, when you think of Joburg, for example, we think of more employment, we think of more entertainment facilities, we think of just a better life in general from where you're located, basically, if you're located in a small town. So push factors, unfavorable conditions which force people to move away. The key thing there to understand: push, move away; pull, they attract people. All right. So those are the two broad categories, the reasons as to why, or rather the causes of rural urban migration. Now, we can delve in a much more detail into the push and the pull factors. So in other words, we'll start with the push factors. We'll look at, remember, the term push, it's like an umbrella. So now we'll look at the factors individually, or rather separately, that actually force people to move away from rural areas. In other words, the push factors. Now, remember, rural areas are unifunctional settlements. And the main economic activity is centered around the primary economic sector. In other words, we're speaking of farms, for example. So one of the reasons why people move from farms, it's due to the mechanization of farms. In other words, as technology improves, more and more people move away from farms and they go to urban areas. Now, why is this the case? Now, think of a tractor. Think of a farm. Let's say it's 1,000 hectares or whatever the case is. Like, think of a huge farm. Now, can you imagine before the development of a tractor, how many people it used to take just to plow in a farm before the development of a tractor? So in other words, the tractor has taken jobs that were supposed to be done by people. Now, for those of you that are familiar with the fourth industrial revolution, it sounds familiar, right? So the developments such as tractors has led to many people moving away from rural areas, because the jobs that were supposed to be done by people are now being done by machines such as tractors. So fewer jobs, thus people moving away, because remember, this is a rural area. If you cannot get employment in a farm, there are very few alternative means to get employment. So that's the first reason. Mechanization leading to the loss of jobs, thus people moving away. Now, another push factor, it would be during times of droughts. Now, we know that due to climate change and global warming, droughts have become much more common over the past 100 years or so. So obviously, if you're staying in a rural settlement and the only place where you can get employment is in a farm, and then obviously during a time of a drought, in other words, during that time where we do not experience enough rainfall, it means people will not be able to get employment in the farms. Why? Because remember, a farm is a business. So therefore, if it's not raining enough, it means now the farmer has to now come up with alternative means for irrigation, which are much more expensive, thus increasing operation costs of the farm, therefore leading to more people being laid off, because now the farmer will be spending more money to make the farm run smoothly, and that's the only way in order for him to increase his profits would be to lay off workers because of a drought. So that's another reason. Droughts, less water, farms may even close, for example. Farms may even close, so therefore it means less employment opportunities in the rural areas. Therefore, people choose to move away. Now, another reason it would be there's a lack of educational facilities. Most rural areas do not have schools. It's a very sad, but it's a well-known fact that most rural areas, particularly in South Africa, do not have access to basic services such as schools, running water, electricity. Except the higher institutions of learning, because dinyani in South Africa as a whole. So a lack of all those services leads to people moving. And what's interesting to note, Kuri, when you look at the age structure, in other words, when you look at the numbers, or rather when you look at the ages of people that move from these rural areas, it's mainly the youth. Now, it's basic common sense as to why this is the case. It's because youth, you understand what I'm trying to say? They need employment, they need education, because once about so therefore it's mainly the youth that moves away from the rural settlements. So those are some of the reasons, or rather those are some of the push factors, amongst many other factors that I'm sure you can think of, Luwen. But that's just a summary of the main reasons as to why people move from rural areas, the push factors. Now, what's really nice about this chapter, Settlement Geographies, is the fact that it deals with issues that are around us, issues that affect us. It's either issues that have affected us personally, or it's an issue that you've seen someone experience. Nonetheless, let's look at the pull factors. Why, in other words, let's look at the reasons, or rather, let's look at some of the factors that attract people to urban areas. Why? What is it about urban areas that attracts rural migrants? Now, the first and foremost reason, pull factor in other words, is the fact that people seek to improve their standard of living and their quality of life. Now, people tend to think that the standard, well, it's true actually, but the standard and the quality of life in cities is much more better than the standard of living and the quality of life in rural settlements. So that's the first reason. People seek a better life. People seek a better quality of life and a better standard of living. Now, the reason why there is a better standard of living and a better quality of life in cities, it's because there are more employment opportunities. Now, remember, in our definition of a rural settlement, we said it's a unifunctional settlement. Now, an urban settlement, we say it's a multifunctional settlement. We say it's multifunctional. It means, in other words, it has many economic activities happening within the settlement. In other words, in a city, you can get employment, you can become a car guard, you can become a lecturer, you can become a teacher, a doctor, you can become a radio DJ, you can become an artist, you can become whatever that you choose, because there are more employment opportunities in cities because they're multifunctional in their nature. So it's easier for you to get employment. you don't only get employment in a farm. There are many more other employment opportunities. So that's the second reason. Also, one of the reasons why people go to urban areas is because in urban areas there are better facilities. There's more schools, there's more hospitals, there's just more of everything in cities. The infrastructure is better. Like, for example, most universities in South Africa are located in urban areas, unfortunately. So those are some of the reasons why people go to urban areas, because there are better facilities, hospitals, schools, and the likes. Also, because there are more employment opportunities, it means people earn a regular income, right? People earn a regular income because there's more employment opportunities. You are not only limited to one type of a job. There are many jobs, so the income is regular. And also, people tend to go to cities because there are more entertainment facilities. There's more entertainment facilities. There's stadiums. There are more recreational facilities. There's, the bright lights basically in the cities also attract people in the urban areas. Theaters, clubs, stadiums, and so forth. So, and also it's because most entertainment events happen in urban areas. So that's why most people choose to leave the urban areas. So again, I want to emphasize this fact. When we deal with settlement geographies, it's not as abstract as your geomorphology and climatology. These are things that we see and experience on a daily basis. It's just a matter of studying and getting accustomed to the jargon used in geography. That's it. So those are some of the pull factors. All right. So before we look at the consequences of rural urban migration, because obviously people moving away from a rural settlement, there are bound to be consequences. There are bound to be effects, in other words, in that rural settlement. And there's also bound to be consequences or effects of that movement in urban areas. But before we look at that, here's some interesting information about rural urban migration in South Africa. It says in SA, since the discovery of minerals and the establishment of towns, a steady stream of people has moved out of the rural areas, because now obviously they got jobs in the mines where the minerals were mined and stuff like that. A clear case study is Gibo Kimbali. Johannesburg is also a clear example, rural urban migration. Because remember when gold was discovered in the Witwatersrand area, we had many people moving away from the homelands towards the Witwatersrand area, which we now refer to as Johannesburg. Nonetheless, so the discovery of the minerals has accelerated during the years of depression, that is in the 1930s, and with industrialization in the 50s. Okay, so that was just some interesting information on rural urban migration. Now let's look at the consequences of rural urban migration. So we'll look at it in the form of a like match the column kind of style. We have rural areas on the other column and urban areas on the other column. Right. Now let's look at the consequences in the rural areas, the effects. What are the effects? Now, obviously when people live in the rural areas, it means now there will be less people, right? Now, that concept where the numbers of people are decreasing in the rural areas is what we refer to as rural depopulation. That decrease in the amount of people in the rural areas, rural depopulation. So I give out really confusing. Rural urban migration, rural depopulation. Rural urban migration, movement of people from rural areas to urban areas. Rural depopulation, because people have left. In other words, because of rural urban migration, the numbers of people now in the rural areas has decreased. That's what we refer to as rural depopulation. So as a result of rural depopulation, which was caused by rural urban migration, it means now there are very few people to work in farms. Now, as a result, because now we have very few people left to work in farms, it means now the farms will be neglected or they will be abandoned. So in other words, there won't be any form of income for that settlement, because remember, it's a raw settlement, its main economic activity farming and fishing and the likes, primary economic activities. So the farms become abandoned because there's no one to work in the farms. Now, another consequence, in the rural areas, meant to say, that the villages, remember, when you classify rural settlement according to their size, we see three distinct types of rural settlement. We have an isolated farmstead, which is the smallest one. We have a hamlet, which is a loose grouping of isolated farmsteads, and the largest of them all, it's a village. Now, because of rural urban migration, these villages, they become ghost towns. Now, what do we mean by a ghost town? Now, a ghost town, it would be a village which has been abandoned. So you'd see a settlement with the proper infrastructure, with the roads, houses, and so forth, but there aren't any people staying there. And the reason why, it's because there's no economic activity happening in that settlement. And that's what we refer to as a ghost town. So that's another consequence. The farms become abandoned, no one works in the farms, the villages ultimately become a ghost town. Now, because the farms have been abandoned, obviously as a businessman, only a farmer, the most logical step, if you don't have enough employees to work in the farm, it's just to close the farm. You understand? So it means if the farm is closed, it means there will be fewer jobs available within the rural settlements, because now the farm has been closed. So now there won't be many alternative means of employment, because the main mean of employment in a farm. So now it's abandoned. So it means now there's few jobs available on the farms, right? Now, as a result, guys, when you look at the age structure, raw settlement, we tend to see that we have more older people in the raw settlement as compared to the youth. Now, so one of the consequences would be that raw settlements have an aging population. An aging population is when you look at the age structure of a settlement and then you see that the majority of people staying in that settlement are old people. You understand? So the population ages, which means that the villages have mostly old people living there, as the young people have moved to the bigger towns. So can you see now, it will create a cycle of stagnation. You understand? There aren't jobs, and more people, more and more young people will leave. As a result, because we have more and more young people leaving, we won't have enough people to work on the farms. You understand? Because obviously, they can't work in the farms because we're old. You understand? So, because the youth has left, it means ultimately the farms will close down, leading to less jobs available, thus accelerating the rate of rural urban migration, right? And then lastly, the productivity in the farms declines because there's no one working in the farms. The youth has left, so therefore the farm will obviously not be productive. You understand? So those are some of the consequences on the rural areas. Okay, so let's look at it in the form of a flow chart, just to summarize it. The consequences on the rural areas. Né? So we have farmers and the laborers which leave the farms, right? The country, the village will have fewer customers because people have left. the businesses, they close, right? So because businesses have closed, people continue leaving, right? As a result, because people are continuing to leave the rural areas, it means we have fewer services which are needed in the country towns because you have fewer people. So therefore, it means our rural settlements will be in a state of economic stagnation. And as a result, we'll only see an aging population. All right. Now, let's look at the consequences on the cities. Remember, Kite and Twina, it's like two sides of the same coin. It has effects on the rural areas. It has also effects on the urban areas. In Twina, iling rural urban migration, the movement of people from the rural areas to urban areas. Now, because we have a huge number, because we have many people coming from different parts of the country, different rural settlements in different parts of the country, your Eastern Cape, your Limpopo, your KZN, your Free State, all flocking towards Gauteng as an example. Obviously, the amount of jobs that would be available in Gauteng would not be sufficient to cater for everyone. Now, the situation in South Africa is further made worse by the fact that you also have migrants from our neighboring countries such as Lesotho, Zimbabwe, and so forth, which are mainly rural areas, which are predominantly rural, so they all flock to one central region. So as a result, the consequence will be that there will be a shortage of employment opportunities in the cities because now, right? So that's the first one, lack of jobs. The second one, it would be, guys, when you get there, the first thing that we need before we need a job is a place to stay. Now, obviously, the amount of houses in the urban areas would not be enough to cater for everyone. As a result, we have a shortage of houses. Okay? We have a shortage of jobs, we also have a shortage of housing, and because we have a shortage of housing, the only way the only logical thing for people to do when they cannot get housing from the government is to build their own houses. Now, because Botswana are from rural areas, and remember in the rural areas, we did not have, or rather there aren't enough schools, so therefore the likelihood Botswana from the rural areas are uneducated, so therefore they cannot get formal employment. So therefore, Abafitla in the urban areas, there's a shortage of employment, there's a shortage of housing, and therefore it means we'll see more informal settlements. Like we'll see more shacks, you understand? Because now people don't have jobs, so therefore it means they cannot buy proper houses. And there's not enough houses provided by local municipalities and governments and the likes. So therefore people will build informal settlements. And now, because these people cannot get jobs within the formal economy, within the official economy. Now, Arubaga, the official economy, we are speaking of jobs that are formalized. These people, they do not have qualifications, so they cannot be easily absorbed by the economy. They cannot work as professionals. So we'll see more informal traders. We will see more hawkers in our urban areas because people cannot get jobs. So it's a shortage of employment, insufficient housing, leading to more informal settlements, and also leading to more informal traders. And as a result, where you have informal traders, I'm sure you've seen mostly in your city centers, in the CBDs, next to your taxi ranks, more naling the hawkers tengai, only overcrowding engada. That's why this coronavirus was such a huge scare for us, because can you imagine in your city centers, more than the taxi rank, only the informal traders. So we'll also see overcrowding developing in our cities, thus facilitating, rather thus leading to diseases spreading much more easily. Example, the COVID-19. You understand? And also, we'll also see an increase in criminal activities. In other words, your crime rates increase because remember, we don't have jobs, we don't have places to stay, and obviously, it's only human nature for those people to resort to crime as their last option. And also, the infrastructure in the cities will not be able to cope with this large number of people. In other words, we'll see more damage to our roads, we'll see more damage to the roads, bridges, and also sewage because it cannot cope with the increased population. Now, with no income available, rather, many people who have migrated to urban areas, they resort to crime. I've also alluded to that. And it also leads to more social ills. In other words, we'll see more drug abuse, we'll see more gangsterism, we'll see more prostitution, we'll see more human trafficking and the likes. And lastly, because now Rubangata, it's overcrowded in the cities, we have many informal traders, we have many informal settlements, we'll see more pollution. We'll see more pollution in the cities. So those are some of the consequences of rural-urban migration on both the cities and also the rural settlements. Again, I want to emphasize this fact. When we deal with settlement geographies, we are looking at issues which affect our lives, whether directly or indirectly. There's a high likelihood you have experienced some of the things that we are discussing. Like I, for example, I'm a rural migrant because I moved from a rural area and then I went to an urban area in search of education. You understand? And I'm sure there's many people within your communities and even within your close families that have moved from somewhere, from a rural area to an urban area for one of the reasons that we have alluded to. Now, I had prepared an activity for us to go through, just to look at some of the questions from previous question papers in an attempt to look at the structure or the style of questions used to assess this specific concept. So the question paper I have with me, it's figure 4.3. I took it from question paper February and March 2017. So March 2017, figure 4.3. That's the activity that I want us to go through in the next 10 minutes or so that we'll accept your questions. Now, in the interest of time, Manabaka, there's an extract, Kamona. I'll just read through it very fast. So, rural urban migration, the title of the extract is Hope. It was written by Suzanne Melda on the 26th of November 2012. Now, it reads as follows. Rural urban migration is believed to affect various dimensions of migrants' well-being. Desires such as the opportunity to improve the standard of living and better services are not always met. That's very key. In other words, what they're speaking to that to the fact that most people move from rural areas to urban areas with the hope that they will improve their lives when they get to urban areas. Now, as we've seen when we looked at the consequences of rural-urban migration on the cities, this is not usually the case. People, for example, would move from a rural area, to an urban area in search of employment. Hawa fita mo, hauna employment. And as a result, because what's not employment, about resorted to crime. You understand? Okay, now let's continue. The process of migration is often undertaken with an aspiration, that is the desire of improved opportunities for socio-economic advancement. However, it does not always entail improvement of living standards and poverty eradication. Rural migrants settling in big cities are the most vulnerable and may experience unsafe living conditions. So the first question, it's very easy for 1 mark. What is rural urban migration? We know it. Movement of people from rural areas to urban areas. Now, here's an interesting one. It says, the extract implies hope, in quotes, from rural urban migration. What are the migrants expecting in the urban areas? Now, this is clear, simple English. Now, in other words, what is expected foremost in this question is to basically explain some of the proof factors, some of the factors that are desirable, that rural migrants see as desirable in the urban areas. In other words, if I try to proof factors, and we know those proof factors. They are hoping, they are expecting to find employment in employment opportunities in urban areas. They are expecting better salaries. They are expecting improved housing conditions. They are expecting improved educational or medical facilities. They are expecting better service delivery. And in general, they are just expecting improved living standards. So those are some of the proof factors. Now, the second last question, 4.3.3, it says, explain why rural urban migration does not always lead to an improvement in the standard of living of rural migrants. Why does rural urban migration not always lead to an improvement in the standard of living in the rural urban for rural urban migrants? In other words, questioning and we discuss some of the consequences that in rural urban migration for the migrants in the cities. In other words, we need to discuss some of the conditions that they experience when they get to the cities. Remember what one about from rural areas meant to say via in the cities because they wanted to improve their standard of living. As implied in the extract, this is not always true. So we need to prove that statement basically. Now, one of the reason why rural urban migration does not lead to an improvement in the standard of living for rural migrants is because there is not enough employment opportunities in the cities to cater for everyone. As a result, the rural migrants will be forced to work in the informal sector with lower wages. I'm sure in the corners so that they get peace job. So they can't find employment. And also, they have inadequate skills to qualify for employment in the formal sector. So that's why basa khonu fana msebenzi in the formal sector. And there's a lack of housing. And because there's a lack of housing, they would have to stay in informal settlements, which result in even much more poorer living conditions, even worse conditions than the conditions they had experienced in rural areas. And also, in urban areas, the cost of living is just way too high, and Batuana are unemployed, so therefore they cannot afford to survive in urban areas. Okay. Now, lastly, it says in a paragraph of 8 lines, evaluate the negative impact of rural urban migration on the cities. So this question is more or less a continuation of 4.3.3. Now, in this instance, we are evaluating the negative impact of rural-urban migration on the cities. The question is specific. We need to focus on the cities. All right. Now, firstly, because there's a lack of housing, we see more informal settlements in the cities. We see high levels of unemployment. We see increased levels of crime because we have many unskilled people who cannot get jobs. We see the provision of services will not be able to reach anyone. So you'd have areas within cities that do not have services such as water and electricity. We see many people living in unhygienic conditions, unhygienic conditions, as waste removal in the city cannot cope with the large amount of the population. Also, we'll see traffic congestion. Traffic congestion, we'll also discuss it further. We'll also discuss it in much more detail as we move further with the chapter. Traffic congestion is basically where we see too many cars on the roads. And also pollution increases. And lastly, we'll see that our cities become overcrowded, amongst many other consequences of rural-urban migration on the cities. Again, Banabaka, these are things that have affected our lives, either directly or indirectly. So as you read through this chapter, try to link some of the things that you're studying with your life, and it's most likely to make more sense.
Right on 103 Hope FM, connecting communities. It's now exactly just 13 minutes before the hour 11 o'clock, right on 103. And as I did mention that from now till the hour 11 o'clock, we'll just definitely be taking those questions in regards with today's lesson. If you have any questions in regards with today's lesson, 072-839-0427 is the number to dial. That's 072-839-0427. If you have any questions regarding today's lesson or the activity that Mr. Mandla has just done with us right now, 072-839-0427. I'm taking your questions as well as your calls. And right now there's a question here saying that, good morning, Neo, and good morning, sir. Sir, can you please, Neo, can you please ask sir to briefly explain what is urbanization?
Now, urbanization is it's basically a consequence of rural depopulation and also rural urban migration. Now, remember, it's a rural urban migration. It's when now we are seeing many more people moving away from rural areas to urban areas. So as a result, it means now you'd have more people in a country, rather a large percentage of the country staying in urban areas, and that's what we call urbanization. So in urbanization, it's when we see a large percentage population of a certain country staying or living in urban areas. So that's how rural urban migration causes urbanization.
072-839-0427. That is 072-839-0427. If you have any questions today in the last 6 minutes or so that are just left of the geography lesson, that is the number to dial, 072-839-0427. And do remember that if you're a business studies student, from the hours of 11 to 12, we'll be doing business today with Mrs. Musweu right here on 103 Hope FM. And the topic for today, it's investment, of course, as well as insurance. And as it is stated here, it's from part of paper 2, I believe. But ma'am will definitely just give more clarity on that. And then if we are doing life sciences as well as accounting, do tune in from the hours of 5 to 6. This evening, we'll be having Mr. Musia with life sciences, and then from 6 to 7, we'll be having Dr. Dilange, who's going to be doing accounting. And the topic for today, it is the cash flow statement right here on 103 Hope FM. We are also on Sidibeng FM as well as on www.hopefm.co.za. That is www.hopefm.co.za. It's now just exactly 5 minutes before the hour 11 o'clock right here on 103 Hope FM, connecting communities. Sir, leading up to the question that you just answered, here comes again. It says that, so sir, does population pressure lead to the push factor? Does population pressure lead to the push factor?
Does population pressure lead to the push factors?
Yeah.
In other words, like, I'm not quite sure when I look at population pressure, but answer it assumption or he or she meant or could you rephrase the question?
Remember, this is the phrase.
It's a follow-up. Yes,
the follow-up.
Yeah.
So just after you answered,
Yeah.
she comes again and says that, so sir, does population pressure lead to the push factor?
Basically, I'll answer it in this way. The push factors, giddy situations, or rather, these are the conditions selling in the rural areas which mainly lead to people to move away. So I'm not quite sure as to what she means by population pressure leading to push factors, or does she mean does the fact that there are unfavorable conditions in the rural areas the leader to people moving away? I'm not quite sure as to what she meant by population pressure. If we still have time, population pressure.
Yeah. So if you're still tuned in, please just maybe rephrase your question again, so that sir can definitely just understand what you meant there. 072-839-0427. That is 072-839-0427. And then sir, she comes back again saying that what I meant to say was having many people in a certain area lead to the push factor?
Does having many people in a settlement lead to the push factors? Now, it's actually quite interesting you ask that question, because remember, one of the push factors, one of the reasons why people move from rural areas, it's because there aren't enough people to work in the farms. So in other words, your question would mainly apply to another concept now, counter-urbanization. Now, counter-urbanization is actually the opposite of rural urban migration. Other textbooks refer to counter-urbanization as urban-rural migration. In other words, because now in cities it's clustered, it's overcrowded, we see now people moving away from urban areas back to rural settlements. So it mainly applies to when we now look at urban settlements. Yeah, but the fact that rather hauna a rural settlement in a batho ba bangata. You understand what I'm trying to say? Because people in the rural settlements have left. You understand? Because hauna misibiti in the farms, because there's no one to work in the farms. You understand?
I definitely believe that she has been answered, and you managed to answer her in, basically just gave her what she wanted to hear.
Yeah.